Please.
So I'm going to begin, and I have 5
Yes.
minutes, right? So I'll set the stage very quickly. My name's Cliff Young. I'm a professional pollster. I'm a lecturer here as well at Johns Hopkins SAIS. I work for Ipsos. Ipsos is the third largest market research and polling firm in the world. We have offices in 90 countries, and obviously we've been doing work in Brazil for a very, very long time. I've done 6 presidential elections in Brazil. This is my 6th. And I do agree with I do agree, and I think I'll agree with the panelists, this was the most differentiated, difficult, polarized, fractured of all of them. And what I want to do very quickly is set the stage, the contextual stage for Brazil. And then I want to put Brazil very quickly in global perspective, because what we're seeing in Brazil, we're seeing everywhere in the world. It might take on different flavors and manifest itself differently, but the populist underlying sort of tendencies are expressing themselves in Western Europe, all over Latin America, and indeed here in the United States as well. So very quickly, what was this election about? That's always the first question I always ask. Going into an electoral cycle, what is this about? What are the voter demands? What do they want? What does public opinion want? They didn't want your bread and butter things. They weren't so interested in jobs or healthcare or security. These things were important, and they always had been important over at least the last 4 electoral cycles, presidential cycles. They weren't interested in that. They were lower priority demands. They were principally concerned with corruption. They were concerned after Mensalão, that is a vote-buying scandal in the mid-2000s, the mid-2000s, and then obviously Lava Jato, the car wash scandal. They were concerned about a political class that was not delivering on their primary demands. This is very important because corruption had heretofore, up to that point, up to this point, had never been a key driver, a key issue in Brazil. It had been a secondary or tertiary issue. It became the issue of the day. The backdrop to that was a deep-seated feeling of discontent with the system, belief that the system is broken. We're talking 80% plus of the population believing that, whether they were on the right or the left. A widespread belief, once again, supermajority belief, that politicians, traditional politicians, parties and politicians don't care about people like them, and that, once again, supermajority belief and demands that they needed a strong leader to take the system back, take the country back from the rich and the powerful. And so when you ranked order at the beginning of the electoral cycle, those key demands, they weren't those bread and butter issues, as I was saying. They were corruption in first place and having a strong leader to take back the country. And this differentiated whom? It was Bolsonaro, right? Early in the year, we had Barbosa as well. He was a former Supreme Court justice. He was very well positioned, actually. Indeed, in my class this last semester, the spring semester, we picked him to win it, but then he dropped out. But Bolsonaro, he would have won it. He might have been the president if he had stayed in, but he decided to drop out. But Bolsonaro was the only candidate of a field of 6, 7 legitimate candidates, another maybe 15 or so if you add in all the small ones. He was the only candidate in the entire field that met these specific demands. Indeed, over the course of the entire election, both first and second round, he had a 25-point lead on corruption and being a strong leader, vis-a-vis the next in place, and that was the PT candidate Haddad. Okay, so that's the first point. He was the candidate that met those demands. It's important to note on the side about the PT, we expected there to be a PT Bolsonaro second round as well. Why? Because PT is the only party that has any sort of identification in Brazil, somewhere between 20 and 25. So you've got this baked-in base that in a multi-party, multi-candidate first round, where the vote is pulverized, where it's fractured, you get enough votes to get to the second round. So that's the first point. First point is Bolsonaro met the demands. He was the one that was most convergent. And in this scenario of a broken system, and this is what we're seeing globally, in this scenario, in this environment of a broken system, actually, there are points to be gained from authenticity, even if you're truculent. So think Trump being truculent. Think Bolsonaro being truculent. These sorts of attributes in normal scenarios, normal situations, do not have a premium. They had a premium in this electoral cycle. And the last point I want to make, just a kind of a general contextual point, is that yes, we're seeing this everywhere. We're seeing this across the Western world. And there are 2 basic vectors. The one vector is the system is broken, society is in decline, the established is not delivering on our basic demands. The point being here is they take on different flavors. And so in Brazil, because of the sort of candidates that were there, because of the history, we had Bolsonaro, a right-leaning or a far-right candidate. In Mexico, actually López Obrador, fit that same profile though he is on the left. Anti-corruption was the key, and indeed across Latin America, anti-corruption has taken over in most countries, and most of the large countries, the other key issues being economy and jobs and security. The last point I want to make is we're seeing the same sort of thing in the United States and Europe. Widespread belief, supermajority belief that the system is broken. There's a demand for populist-like figures that are willing to break the rules to try to take the country back. Does that sound familiar here? Take the country back, right? The difference between Latin America, more specifically Brazil, and the rest of the Western world, that is Europe, continental Europe on the one hand, the United States on the other, is that you have strong nativist drivers, strong anti-immigration drivers. So the key issue in a place like the United States or in continental Europe, or even Brexit if you throw it in there, was some form of anti-immigration and nativist sentiment that drove the outcome at the polls. But once again, in Latin America, more specifically in Brazil, it was the demand for a strong leader and one that would take the country back from the corrupt and powerful. Thank you.